young boy. My parents were in the military and we lived overseas. So I began to understand that the exchange process that had to be taking place, if you lived in Europe at that time, they used their own national currencies. And so you would exchange your dollars for their local currency, or they would gladly accept dollars at their the rate that they thought that was convertible for them. So I've been doing this since I was a teenager.
So you've got quite a bit of experience with this then.
And I don't think so. I don't think so. Um, it's not unlike anybody that goes to their local shopping market or store. Buying and selling for goods and services is just something that everybody must do and master, or they must be willing to, deal with the consequences of decisions that are being made. When if you pay somebody to install carpet or something in your house, not only do you have a salesman, but you've got an installer, and in order to receive just return, something that will satisfy you, there's a lot of different things that have to go into play to make that sell happen and work well for you. So you have to just be wise in what you do and how you spend your money.
That's very true, and that's a very good way to put it. I like that. Now, yesterday there was an article posted on the Zimbabwe introducing gold-backed currency, and it's going viral in the groups and all over the internet, actually. A lot of people read the headline, but may not have fully read the article to understand it completely, but you did. And you shared about it in the room, along with your previous research on it, the book from the Zim notes. Can you share with everyone what you've learned about the Zim?
Well, okay. Zimbabwe is one of those countries, nations in South Africa that had great resources, and that still does. It has great resources. And it was a colonial ambition that took over that region of the world. And the colonial powers did it to expand the wealth of their own king or queen. And so that was in, the 17, 18, 1900s. Those colonial powers were in control. Zimbabwe was always considered exploited for what they held. So unless you had they mined gold, they mined diamonds, they mined other resources, but unless you had the prizes of trade, you did not buy and sell. So they manipulated the value of their currency, which at that time they decided it would be called a dollar as well. And a Zimbabwe dollar is similar to an Australian dollar in the sense that it's not a U.S. dollar, and it's not backed by the faith and credit of the United States or the country. The country that it's representing, say Zimbabwe or Australia, those are night and day reflections of a country and its credit. So Zimbabwe, when it gained its independence, began to suffer under hyperinflation, where it took not just $1 to buy a loaf of bread. It might take a barrel load or a wagon full of these notes. So they began to add zeros to the end of a $50 note. They would make it into 50 million and then billion and then trillions. So those notes had no increased value other than the numbers that they were displaying. And so that's what's called hyperinflation. And that could visit us someday, but we hope that won't happen. Basically, they don't want to tell you that their currency is actually going down in value. They just try to put a facade or a fake view on it that shows that they're still viable, and their currency can be used and traded amongst each other in other countries. Most generally, a country's currency is used in their trade to buy needed services or special minerals or things that they need to buy to be able to process into um, things that everybody and the people need for industries and agriculture and just in general trade. So when you say that we talked about the buying the carpet, floor covering or something, that's just a pretty good word picture for any country that must do trade outside their borders with other countries to receive the goods or services that they need for themselves. So Zimbabwe uh, is one of those countries that has overthrown and replaced their government many, many times. And generally, it was about uh, a process of popularity. If somebody would come along and tickle the ears of of another, a group of people, they would build support. It's not unlike what happens in our country, but in their country with um, small avenues or outlets for news and stuff, it was very easy to control what was getting out to the public. So Zimbabwe went into hyperinflation in the mid to late um, 80s and 90s, and it just basically got out of control. So in 2008 and 9, they started coming out with these trillion notes because instead of having $1, you needed $1 trillion to be able to buy the same loaf of bread. And the numbers were just getting absolutely outstanding. I can't even pronounce quadrillion very well, but that was a number that was flashed around quite a bit too. But in 2009 was the last time they printed this series of notes and bonds, and it just happened to these notes had been printed with a reflection of the U.S. standard was that they would become bearer, paid to the bearer of, and it's printed on most of their notes. Even I think maybe even today, many of those notes that they produce would have that that uh, uh, presentation on it. So it became what's known as a bearer bond. If you bear it, they must pay you. If you were to present it to your, say, a desk at the treasury of their country, they would be obligated to pay you what that note was worth. Much like our savings bonds here, um, you may buy the note at a reduced rate, $50 for a $100 savings bond, but in 7 years after it's accumulated its interest, it would be worth $100 face value. So that became the essence of these notes. And after I believe it was 2012, they had stopped using those that series of notes from '08 and '09. They stopped using it, and basically in the country of Zimbabwe, those notes became worthless and like toilet paper. They would use it to start fires. They would use it to paper their walls. They would paste them all over. And the problem was that they had overprinted so much that there was not just a few trillion, there was hundreds and thousands of trillions of these notes out in the open market. And so they had to stop using them and cancel their usage and printing. And that is the essence of how to measure the value of a country and its currency is based on the number of notes or dollars that are in circulation. such as what we call our M2 or M3 or M1, a money supply. And so, as you can see by the debt clock, if you go and look at it, you will see that these numbers of dollars in our country are rising and falling, and they're some of them are projected, some of them are current, and some of them reflect the past. You can get a measure of where we are now by looking at the past and history. So that would tell you that Zimbabwe, unlike most other countries, um, was was not bankrupt. They were not without assets, but they were without a vehicle to convey their ability to trade. It was not seen as something that could be valued or leaned on or trusted. Excuse me. So um, Zimbabwe kind of fell to the wayside, and there is in the United States and Europe there had been a I guess an effort is the best way to put it, an effort underway that would begin to take back control of the monetary systems that global governance was using, and it was basically to overthrow the petrodollar. The dollar in the 70s was through Nixon was set up as uh, the global currency of value, meaning that you could go to Saudi Arabia, you could order a tanker load of oil, and they would accept dollars to pay for that. And that global currency became the platform for the world. And a great deal of effort has gone into maintaining that 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 platform. I'm trying to be very careful about what I say because I I operate under the theory that anything you say or do can and will be used against you. So it's important that we don't we don't draw criticism under the current global efforts because they still have the ability to harness and maybe stop, you know, try to stop us from saying what we know. Anyway, um, as time had progressed, debt became higher. Economists knew that it would become out of control eventually, and that eventually the debt interest would be more than the or the asset value created. And so, much like you can see today, when we're incurring $1 trillion in U.S. money every 100 days or just over 100 days to our national debt. Eventually, that will be so high that the people will not be able to um, pay that debt. And so the country becomes bankrupt. This happened in Zimbabwe. And so their currency was bankrupt. Their country was essentially seen as bankrupt, and they were set aside. So other people saw this and knew that Zimbabwe had resources and had a right to back their currency. Zimbabwe has a great deal of gold, and the articles that were coming out last night were basically supporting that gold asset dollar. Um, that was what we used to use in the 30s, and that was what we went to until the 70s when Nixon essentially took us off that platform completely from silver and gold. Um, Gold has always been not just a, an asset value, but it has been a marketable currency, a form of buying and selling. So, in a long time ago, you could take a $20 gold piece and you would receive $20 of value from it, whether it be tools or clothes or food. Now you can see that same 1 ounce of gold is valued at almost $2,350 this last week, and it's a record amount. And silver seems to want to follow that, and those are just pressures that are put on that asset, that value, gold or silver, to measure the demand from the public and the demand from the industries that use it. And those values were suppressed for the better part of 70 or 80 years to control that trade. Right now, silver is highly demanded for electronic uses, and it's not produced at a level that can maintain the supply. And so, in truth, they have the powers to be have taken that demand and applied it to paper derivatives, meaning that they can buy and sell several ounces of whatever the asset is on paper. And so, again, at the debt clock, they show these paper to asset balances. And so you might see that there's 1400s contracts of silver written for every 1 ounce of silver that's available. And that's an overweight. That's a entirely inflated view of the situation, but it is the truth. And so these people that buy and sell these paper derivatives affected Zimbabwe too. They tried to start that trade in their market, and it flopped, and they couldn't support it. That being said, Zimbabwe and their currency went to the cellar and died, and they used that money basically to heat their houses with or start their kitchen fires, and most of it was destroyed. Now, as time has gone by, the United States and a global governance that saw a lot of corruption has started to fight against that corruption, and they had two different avenues that they were working down. We know that there's a great fight against human trafficking. We know that there's a great fight against political corruption. We know that there's a great fight against food inequities. There's a lot of people that want to control the food so that they might control the population, and they want to put people in a position where they can't travel very far, and they can't be going to and fro and doing their conducting their trade on their own free will or their own terms. Governance that we have currently in positions of power would like to control that ability, and for people not to come and go as they please. But in the background, there was a huge effort put into play to begin to identify and gather evidence in such a way that it could be used to right the situation, to put things back where it belonged. And to do that meant that basically an economic collapse would have to take place. And whether it be by free will or by an overweight where the markets just simply collapsed under their own weight from the burden of debt. Keeping in mind that Zimbabwe and many of these other countries that are asset rich were not being exploited at the same way that they had been in the pre 20 or 2000 era, I guess you would say. So Zimbabwe was sitting there with these notes, and there are trust funds they're absolutely huge. Um, I don't know the number of them. I have no definite number, but I'll drop one name, and that's Saint Germain. A lot of people know of Saint Germain and their trust. There's another one that starts with an R, and I won't say it, but these are huge trusts that have, over the years, they've been in use for over 100 years, and simply having accumulated and compounded interest, those funds have grown to enormous sums of money. And if they are backed or added to with gold or silver assets, they become even wealthier. So those assets, those trusts, began to sit down with families from Asian countries, and they were free Asian countries, not controlled political countries. These were countries from 70 to 150 years ago that had great wealth at that time, but their global trade was controlled and not used. And so these, we'll just say the Asian families, these Asian families have a different code of operation and ethics than most of us are frequenting with, or we have understanding of. They use this code to live by, and so I don't know if I can say the name of a man from Cleveland that got very involved in this, but he is involved very much, and he started out just trying to provide housing for homeless veterans and homeless people in his communities. And he began to proceed with that effort, and he ran into a lot of roadblocks. But then he was spoken to concerning this abundance of funds from these Asian families, and they were willing to back his efforts. And it was going well in the late 80s and early 90s until certain political families got wind of the knowledge of this, and they began to desire to take control of those monies. And by hook or crook, and that's a whole nother story that's not mine, there was a lot of game playing by these individuals back and forth, and I'm talking the highest powers in the United States were trying desperately to seek control of these assets, and they pretty well had it done 2 or 3 different times. But it is, but before these assets could be transferred to our current political situation, they must have been approved, and nobody in the families would give that approval. Nobody would release these assets. Nobody would even divulge where they were or what they were. It had been very tight-lipped and secret. Zimbabwe became seen as, I guess, of high value. Um, as time progressed, the dream of humanity changing and taking control back of their governance became a powerful dream, and people began to discuss openly political avenues that might take to be able to put those dreams in place. Um, and they came up with this term of humanitarian projects, and where somebody with a dream or desire to make mankind better would have an avenue by which they could use the vehicle to secure and oversee the asset values, this money. And they put 2 and 2 together, and separate from the currencies that needed to be revalued. Revalued, we're talking about, say, the dinar. The dinar in the last 20 years was overtaken by, I guess, the economic powers to be in the global governance, and they were controlled. And that control was basically by the sale of their oil, and the money from that sale would go into a fund within the United States, and the essence was that a percentage of that money would go to pay off their debt from war reparations from the War of 90 and the War of 2001 and 2. And they incurred that debt by decree of the powers that were in place at that time. And so that has been essence of the great currency reset that were a basket. The basket was always described as essentially 29 countries that needed revaluing because they were undervalued, whether by purposeful effort or just by a demanding and overbearing, dominant, controlling government that was in control of their government. You must understand that most governments work together, and those governments sometimes are controlled by smoky rooms in the back of the office, and we don't necessarily know or see the trading of deals that go on. We hear of it, we know that it's true, but we don't know the particulars. A lot of that has gone on for essentially 200 years. Now, Zimbabwe became recognized as a valued, pre-printed, already in existence bond that could be held until the time of exchange, a redemption, and it was recognizable. It had certain key traits in it that would help it not be counterfeited, and that it could be bought or sold in what's called the collectible market. You can take a silver certificate from the United States, and you can find it on the open market. And if you desire and you want to pay enough, you can purchase that silver certificate. That silver certificate stopped being used or recognized, I think, in the mid-70s, as the United States went off the gold standard, and Nixon began to put into play all these economic needs under Henry Kissinger. But Zimbabwe's currency at that time was not that Zimbabwe bond that we talk about, the one with the stacked up rocks. It was not being used or recognized. Some of the trust people began to say that perhaps if our humanitarian efforts were to be seen as true and affordable and applicable, that we could use those bonds as a measure of value to help other people. So if you were to take a $100 trillion Zimbabwe note, it's a huge number, 12 zeros behind the 100. That's a huge number. And the public needs to understand that that number is just that. It's just a number. And it only reflects value in the sense that someday perhaps a body of people might place value to it. For instance, if you were to say that the U.S. dollar today is worth $1.25, then you would gain value if you were to take your dollars and go to that place that would give you $1.25. And such is the way it is in Canada. Canadian dollars are worth more than U.S. dollars. And it's not something that should be done or traded. Those percentages and pennies are very small, and it doesn't make sense to put out the effort or expense to conduct that trade unless you're crossing the border and you need to buy some to to buy your hamburgers or something like that. But this effort to take back control of our political system overshadows this humanitarian effort that we dream of, being able to use resources and funds to change the world. Um, there's a lot of different people and groups that dream of changing things for other people to make their communities better and the world as a whole. And they're good people, and they mean very well, but they get blindsided by the idea that these are promises, are contracts, that if you hold this contract, that someday it will be of value and you can go to a counter and turn it in and receive a sum of money to use. While that mechanically is true, realistically it is not. A Zim bond is it's like people buying a lottery ticket on the hopes and prayers that their number would come up. But in this case, the Zimbabwe bond is backed by dreams and hopes of humanitarians that desire to overtake the world of corruption so that it can be transformed into something that more looks more like a love your neighbor kind of atmosphere. I avoid trying to put religious overtones to it, but without faith, there is no works. Works are hollow if we do these things for our man, if we're just doing it for credit or to look good. True humanitarian efforts are done in spite of the return, in spite of what we think we're going to get out of it for ourselves. So I look at the Zim effort right now as 100% positive news that Zimbabwe would put assets to back their dollar. They were advised not to do it. They were implored not to do it. Do not place gold as a token that could be exchanged from you and other countries. Perhaps they were pretty much trying to isolate Russia and China and Japan, but know that Japan has been in this world trade governance since World War II, and they took a terrible fall after being overly inflated. And so that could happen in the United States too. Our markets rise, and if they get out of sync, it creates a bubble, and eventually that bubble can collapse. A lot of people believe that it will take a collapse like that to put these economic changes into place where the world can go back to a sound money system. It's been said that derivatives ruined the world because a derivative is a term that's used to describe a paper product, a promise to pay, where you can buy a derivative of contracts where you control, say, 1,000 ounces of gold, and if that price of that, the value of that asset rises, you can sell it. You can sell the paper and collect the difference or the increase. And that's how people have made profits for themselves for centuries. In the case of Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe bond represents our hopes and dreams to create a world where we can do work for humanity. It is not a promise to pay unless it's recognized. And that will take some action in the political realm that is beyond our ability to control, unless unless we become politicians ourselves. So when people want to say, is my Zim bond worthless? Today, it is not worth very much unless somebody is willing to pay for that. You might find somebody that's willing to pay, but they will probably not want to pay you what you gave for that note. And I say this, no, you should know that I have these bonds, I have currencies, I have these assets, not very much in the terms of the big picture, but I have enough to change the generational living of my family. And having come from a family that was poor and overcoming the situations that my family had gone through, I began to understand that the best way to overcome hardships sometimes is to have a nest egg, a situation where I put a little bit aside and for someday when needed. And it's not to say what day that is or when it will be, but my grandmother used to do this with her cookie jar. A lot of the ladies do it now. They'll have a little nest egg, a little security fund that they keep back in case of emergencies. And you can share that. Well, in this case, you might consider obtaining some of these paper note bonds as your security hopes that are paired with your prayers. I truly believe that because God is still on the throne, prayer changes things. I believe he listens and hears our prayers, and he is faithful to hear us and give us an answer. It doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the answer that we desire, but it is probably going to be an answer that we can live with and work with and come to an effort to change the world, and whether it be through our own little family, our community, our state, or whatever. But the humanitarian efforts are not known by most economic controlling powers. They're simply controlled by benevolent individuals and groups that have dreams of change. And they want to have a world that treats each other fairly. They're controlled by common law. They're not controlled by taxation without representation. They're not. They're not. They're not controlled by this idea that you must work your entire life to pay for the dreams and hopes of equality that you see. People get a job, they get to working really hard, and the first thing they start seeing are these advertisements that say you can have all that you want and all that you dream. Just work hard, work a little harder. And the general public has been controlled by the knowledge that say a company has employees. They know what it takes for you to make a living and pay for your bread and basic needs. So if they give you just a little bit more than you need, you will come to work every day. If not, if you were fat and sassy and rich and kind of lazy, you wouldn't come to work. And they would not get the services that they need. So they've kept America, the United States, the world as a whole hungry. And that is basic structure of the debt society that we live in. We've been willing to leverage our time and energy to receive money to conduct those trades. The Zimbabwe bond is not a part of that system. It is simply a vehicle by which humanitarian dreams could come true if the world was to right itself and come back to its senses and say Jasara Nasara was declared. I see no reason to see or think that effort is in the works right now. While it's wonderful, it's positive, I buy into it, I understand it. You must understand that we do not have a definite date anytime soon that we will be able to adjudicate that effort, with no way to make that change come to pass. Perhaps someday. You got to have knowledge that this humanitarian effort has been underway for roughly 20 years, maybe longer, maybe 30 years. But you can't change the world without authority to do it, and you can't do it without the resources to do it. And for most of us, our resources are tied up in meeting our day-to-day needs. I hope some of that has helped. You need to come back on, Pam, if you're there, and tell me what to do.
Yes, that was great information. I mean, giving the total history and everything surrounding all of this, that's exactly what is needed at this time so that people can fully understand all of this and what all is going on. Now, you had posted some pictures last night in the living room that had your Zim notes and the book and things like that, and showing how you can tell the difference between a fake Zim note and a real one. Can you explain that a little bit further, please?
Well, first of all, the book, it was produced by a company, and I won't say it over the air, but it's easily seen on the book, the picture. They, as near as I can tell, are one of the true authentic distributors of those notes. I don't know how they obtained the numbers of notes that they did. I just know that they're reputable, and they stand behind what they say, and they do send authentic certificates to say that what you have is authentic. And so when I began to look at this book, it described the difference between an authentic, real note and an unauthentic counterfeit. And because I had purchased notes from many different companies that were selling them at many different prices, I'll add, I realized I needed to do this research myself. Now, you must understand, I've had some of these for many, many years, and I never bothered to look at them that closely. Most of them were used. Many of them were very used, and smaller denominations. But it became knowledgeable that these 100 trillion Zim dollar bond notes were the gold standard for humanitarian efforts. And so I had a few of those, and I pulled them out, and the only room I could find that would get dark enough in the middle of the day was my bathroom, where I could, make it really dark. And I had bought a black light years ago, and it's way too big, but I have it anyway. I pulled that out, and I turned the black light on, and immediately one of the notes stood out different. It glowed like it was bright, glowing, and the rest of them were very dull and very dark. And by the book, the authentic notes are dull and dark, but they have certain features in them that do glow very brightly under the black light, meaning their serial numbers are the little speckled threads that they placed in the cotton or the material that they printed it on. So and this is fairly recent, within the last 6-7 months. I immediately contacted the seller where I purchased it, and they became hyperbolic because I told them that I would turn them in as selling counterfeit collectibles. And the one thing that you don't want to do is do interstate commerce and send things through the mail as a collectible, if it's declared that to be a collectible, through the post office. So you can bring down a lot of grief upon some of these companies. And so I threatened to exercise my right and ability to do that. And they were more than willing to take it back. But they said they wanted to authenticate it themselves. And they dismissed my ability to authenticate my note. But they did not dispute the pictures that I shared. And they knew very well that they had a problem. And so I'll tell the story this one more step, because it took them 6 weeks before they acknowledged receipt of that note. I had sent it back, registered mail. I wanted a return receipt saying that they signed for it. And it took me 6 weeks. And the reason being, I guess, because they did not want to go to the post office and sign or be seen picking this up. They thought it might be a trap. And so they were very quick and ready to return a new note that was that I could put under the black light, and it looks just like the rest. And so I will only say that people will counterfeit $100 notes from the United States easily. They do it all the time. They'll even do it for $20 notes. So you can imagine now the demand or the reasons why they would be willing to counterfeit these Zimbabwe notes if they can sell them for $100 to $200. It becomes easily understandable that there is a market for the Zim note, maybe a niche market to certain individuals that want them, but only certain. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Are you getting that too?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Anyway, they were more than happy to return it at the end, and so now I'm sitting happy, but I wonder about some of the ones I've given to other people. And now I have to go and do my homework and legwork to backtrack and make sure that everything I have is current. And that included my other currencies, not just the Zim. How's that help?
Gosh, you are a rock star, Lowtide. I mean, taking on the company like that and telling them, look, you sent me a bad note. That is just, I applaud you. Definitely. I do. That's just so amazing. Now, most people wouldn't even think about checking their notes to make sure that they are authentic. So
Yeah.
to have the knowledge and have that book and to be able to do that is awesome.
Yeah. Well, it was eye-opening. And, we have an obligation for due diligence. We can't just, how do you know that when you go to the store, you buy something? Do you know if it's if let's just say it's a name brand piece of clothing? This is often the case with ladies' designer clothes. It's easy to find a knockoff, and generally it would be at a discount price. But it's bold to charge more money, the highest price for that product, because they think that you making that transaction and willing to pay a much higher price than normal, you will believe without question that what you're going to receive is authentic. And that is not the case. You can pay for a piece of clothing, and most generally a knockoff would have a knockoff price. But in the world of counterfeit, going one note at a time, they are able to extract a very high value for that note. And if you believe that that gives you some sort of authentic knowledge, that you can pride, that you can say, well, I bought this from such and such company and I paid more than it ever anybody else did, I must be something special. And we are not special. We are still obligated with due diligence to conduct ourselves in fair trade. We must, it is our obligation that God gave us these resources to use to set up let's just say our nest egg. We must do everything necessary to protect it, defend it, and make sure that it is what we want. We know that there are people right now counterfeiting gold and silver ounce coins or nuggets or whatever. There's a great deal of criminal enterprise involved in these efforts. And so we become somewhat foolish if we're in a hurry to conduct ourselves thinking that you know there is no reason to double check or double down on anything that we do. We can just go in oblivious efforts and live. We must do the things that we must do to conduct ourselves properly.
That's very true. Now, something that we've always stressed here at Seeds of Wisdom is the importance of diversifying your portfolio, not putting all your eggs in one basket, not going with just one currency. And for people to definitely ask proof of these redemption centers that everybody is talking about, especially where the Zim is involved, things like that, as well as learning about the currencies that you're purchasing. Educating yourself and making sure that you'll be able to go to the exchange center with knowledge and facts, and not only get your exchanged funds, but be able to manage them once you do. I'm sure you're diversified.
Yeah.
So
I am.
I mean, that's a stupid question.
Well, I mean, that gets into the weeds a little bit. And so I become a little cautious as to what I share. But listen,
Understandably.
I am not a great holder of anything. I don't have the resources to make that happen. But I have many different things, and I don't know if you want to. I hope you all don't hear my bulldog. She's kind of loud. Sounds like she's snoring or something. But anyway, this effort is balanced in my view. I always thought of myself and my family as needing to prepare ourselves for the inevitable day that they would shut things down. And how can I obtain what I need to conduct my day-to-day business? And when I say that, I mean purchasing food, perhaps gas. Um, I may have something else I need to purchase. So there are ways to do that fractionally, small amounts that you can take and use to obtain the things that you might need someday. And many of those are recognizable, undisputed, unarguable things that have come from the past. And I say that meaning silver-backed coins, fractional coins, a dime, a quarter, a half dollar, and even a dollar. Now, while they don't represent 100% silver, they do represent a fraction. And so with a little bit of math, a person can figure out the value currently of those little coins. And so while they may have gone up significantly, especially in the last couple months, they will always have value. Always. They will always be something that's tradable to and considered a currency. And so there, you might take a gold nugget and or a silver nugget, let's say, and you place that on the counter. The salesperson or the store clerk does not know the value of that nugget, and he has no ability to determine if it is what it says it is or that you say it is. So that it becomes a negotiation and a dispute sometimes. Well, in terms of fractional coinage, there is no dispute. It was minted by our government to have faith in. Now, those same thinking, that same way of thinking applies to currencies. There are currencies out there that have very, very little to no value, but yet they're still being used today. And that's that hyperinflation that we talked about earlier, where it would take, say, it takes a 25,000 dinar note to purchase 5 loaves of bread. Now, that bread is needed by the consumer's family, but are you going to exchange a 25,000 dinar note to get that bread that you need? And certainly you will, especially if you have more of them. But that does not mean that $25,000 dinar note is $25,000. That's not what they're paying. They're simply trading the note and its recognized value on the market for the bread. And currently, I think a 25,000 dinar note, at least on the resale market, is probably in the low 30s to a high 30s, $30 range. So that's why I say you could perhaps get 5 loaves of bread. Now, the dinar and the Vietnamese dong are countries that trade amongst themselves and have for a long time. The Vietnamese people purposely suppress the value of their currency so that they might gain advantage when their products were sold in the United States. Historically, up until the last 10 or 12 years, the United States has always been the primary market for any good or service. The United States citizens consume vast amounts of products. And so if you can get your foot in the door, you can do trade with the US and people that are in that country, then you have an opportunity to sell huge numbers or vast numbers of product. And it doesn't matter whether it's a tractor or whether it's a piece of clothing. The US market has always been strong and very huge and robust, where their market, where people, let's just stay with Vietnam, their market has always been subpar and difficult. Now, that doesn't mean there's not rich people in Vietnam. There are very, very many rich people in Vietnam, but they, in the country, there's a different attitude toward their currency than there is from us in our country being outsiders. They have adjusted. It's just like a flea market. They've adjusted this attitude from within their country where they realize what the value of their currency is. So let's just say it takes a 1,000 Vietnamese dong to buy an egg. Well, that's acceptable in their terms, and we can begin to understand it. But the values of a product are only determined by the buyer and seller. And so when people want to discuss the values of a currency, they must keep in mind that those values are controlled. And right now we await a revaluation of dinar and dong and bolivar and reals and rubies and all those others. 29 countries were in this economic basket of currencies that needed to be and were seen to be in need of an increase of value. Whether it was purposeful or not, those values were suppressed. And so those became the focus of an economic strengthening of their regions. And that included a great vast number of countries in Africa. Now, if those currencies are allowed to, most countries hold foreign currencies in their safes. The U.S. Treasury has vast numbers of dinar and dong and rubies and whatever it is they trade in Russia, the ruble. They hold in their treasury vast amounts of these foreign currencies, and they do so that they conduct trade with them. The governments can conduct trade with each other in using those things. Now, they're allowed to put value to that and measure it, and so that they will put those values on their charts. Everything is charted these days. You can get an Excel file and put it together, and you can show the values of everything you hold. Well, the United States does the same thing, and other countries do the same thing. But these dong and dinar and other currencies were suppressed for a long time, and they're just being seen as an avenue of possibility of being able to revalue and add value to that currency. And if you were to take the dinar today and give it the value of $1, that would be a huge change, and it would represent a possible land. It was just a windfall for the population of that country. Think of it, if they could take that 125,000 dinar note, instead of buying 5 loaves of bread, they could buy a car and pay cash for that car. Now that destroys the credit derivative market, where everybody has dealt with debt for forever and ever, and the bankers lose the interest portion of their portfolio. But that is a possibility. So knowing that many countries have vast amounts of foreign currencies, they would love to see this revalue of currency happen so that they can perpetuate the existing governance as it is. If the United States traded all of their dinar that they currently have, they would have more than enough to pay off their national debt. And I say that boldly, but I'm fairly confident that I'm accurate. That doesn't say anything about the foreign currencies from other countries that they hold. So that there is within our treasury foreign countries' currencies that would more than enough take care of the situation that we have in our politics, where we fight and fuss and argue about how to pay for things. The money is there; it has been there a long time, and many presidents have tried to change it, but they ran up against a great wall of resistance. So I don't know how I got off on this tangent, but I'm just saying foreign currencies for other people are just like just a nest egg, and we hope and pray that it will come true. And I truly believe that we're on the verge of having these stated currencies come to pass. And so there might be vast amounts of resources available. I think the only question is, what would we do prayerfully with that resource? Are we just going to go out and start living large and wining and dining our friends?
That's true, and a very good, yes.
Go ahead. I need
Now,
to take a sip.
Okay, go ahead. There's a couple people in the Q&A room that have questions. Do you have time for a couple questions?
Yeah, I take it.
Okay. The first one is from Clowns to the Left of Me, and they're asking, what is to stop Iraq or Vietnam from doing the same thing that Zimbabwe did and claim their 3-0 notes as being wallpaper, and the people in the currency have 21 days to exchange them for $5 or whatever amount they're exchanging for, and leaving us non-citizens holding more worthless paper?
Well, there's nothing to stop that under the current system or the current governance. But understand that 209 nations have signed what has been called the Gold Treaty. And while there is great desire for Iraq to go alone, huge desires, to do that would violate the signatures and promises of that treaty. That treaty was, I think, signed in 2008. And we all know who was in control of our country in that time period.
Yes.
Those political legs or arms are still essentially in power. You may have a change of head of, the secretary's position may change, but the undersecretaries and the worklings, the underlings of our government have not changed. And so they still see things the same way. So that being said, the only thing, and that's the reason perhaps many people feel it's delayed, is that we must take down the political forces that are in control today, and you must expose them, and to expose them gives you leverage to perhaps prosecute them. For the most part, a lot of this conduct has been in violation of the codes and legislation that were put into place by our elected representatives, but they are being done in the back room by people that were not elected and are not accountable. And so if the only way that we can affect a real change and not have it go back to the way it already is today, to go back to the way it's been the last 60, 70 years, is to be thorough. And that takes time, and that takes a lot of effort. And believe me when I say that there is a lot of effort. There is a huge effort. Goldilocks, Freedom Fighter, Jester, Texas Snake, these people, I'm dropping these names because I know that they're in our group. And they are watchers. They stand on the tower and the wall watching, looking for what's coming. And I don't want to say that I pray and I'm looking for the return of Christ. I this may get a little too deep, but I believe that we have this opportunity and obligation to take back God's creation and put it in a position of what he expected and intended in the first place. I don't think with a conscience that any of us can say that the world is well today. It is sick and it's dark and it will only change with the light of God and his word. And while you may not agree about my faith, you must agree, I think, if you're honest, that the world cannot continue down this path that it's on without the people bending their knee and and being under a strong will of an uh, authoritarian government. It is much like the movies we've seen that talk about this, and we always thought it was just science fiction and too wild and too strange to believe. But these are not works of fiction anymore. Those works describe what we see in many cases today. I went down a little lane that you probably didn't want to go.
That's okay. That's okay. We have another question from Pick, P-I-K. Thank you
Okay.
for hosting this call. Are Argo checks still included? Do you have any information on Argo checks?
Yeah. Well, if I drop a name that's not in a group, I hope you'll forgive me, or I hope he'll forgive me. But agro checks are seen as possibilities. They're not as strong and highly valued as the Zim bond, but they say the same thing: pay to the bearer of. And agro checks were initially or agro bonds were initially being sold to fund the acquisition of agricultural resources, wheat, soy, corn, things like that for the country of Zimbabwe. And so you could go, the citizens, I guess, could go and buy these agro checks years ago and then go exchange them for a bag of flour, let's say. Um, I don't believe that they'll ever be redeemed as at the same rate as the Zim bond, but they're technically the same. They're just another vehicle that's in the same garage, let's say. And so they'll get you to where you want to go. They just might not be as fast or as powerful as one of the others. Does that help?
That helps, yes. And our next question is from Burley Q. Confused as to which paper is a bond and which is a simple currency. Can you explain
Well,
the difference?
yeah. For the most part, a bond is a promise to pay. So if you obtain a savings bond from the United States, um, it in the fine print in the back, it will describe that you hold this bond for a certain amount of time, and then you can exchange it. And if you exchange it or redeem it before the date, calculations will be done to reduce the return. And so $100 savings bond, if it's bought at $50 and it takes 7 years to mature, it would take, and you did it in 5 years, they would simply do the math and figure out how much less to give you. But you can sell that bond. Um, Zim notes or bonds, for the most part, show on them these words that say, and Pamela showed this picture to the public yesterday, and it says, I promise, I got to read it carefully because I don't have my glasses on. I promise to pay the bearer on demand. So therefore, it is considered a bearer bond. For years, many people have used bearer bonds to fund infrastructure changes. They did it in Germany, or they did it in the United States. War bonds were simply bearer bonds. If you went to a rally, if you had a few dollars, you could support the war effort and buy a bond. And at maturity, that bond would be worth what it says. That's simply the attitude that they've applied to these Zim notes. They're not. It is not their currency. They have it entirely. They developed now into a completely different. I believe somebody showed those pictures as well. They look different. They're colorful. Some people would say they're rainbow, but they're not a bearer bond. They're simply a note to buy and sell in exchange for goods or services. And currently, the ones that are currently in circulation are not backed by any asset. That's the difference as to whether they'll be backed by a measurable value of assets. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Yes. Now, Spring Bean is asking, this may have been answered, but are the Zim 2008 and 2009 bonds or currency? And will they be redeemed, do you think?
Well, at the time they were produced, they were considered currency. But as time has developed, they've become a bond because of that promise to pay. And you must understand that the ones that are recognized are only the AA series. These notes or bonds have serial numbers. And so you can look at those serial numbers. You can verify their reality being real by under the black lights, because they will glow orange, and along one side the numbers will glow bright. They'll stand out and jump at you. But the note itself is either an AA or an AB, and that's just a reference to the series of notes that they had produced and they were willing to maintain. Whoever just made these decisions, this group, they could have used, let's say, the ZZ bond, and very few people might have that. I don't even know if that's a real or existing note. I'm making that up, but I'm just saying they had the ability to make decisions on which would be considered valued and which would not. And so the decision was made to honor these AA and AB bonds, and the serial numbers they're tracked. They could be tracked, and there are security features within those bonds that are easily checked by the Delarue machines for being valid.
Okay. One more question, and then I'll let you go for the day. I really appreciate your time today. Definitely. This has been so informative for everybody. Okay, Vicky CR is asking, are all Zim notes good, or is it only the 100 trillion notes, to your knowledge?
Well, I was told to take everything I have. And I'll be honest, I have some that are just for 1 million. And I can't imagine that they're going to take that and give me 30 cents. But that's possible. You know, the equation numbers that are out there are crazy. So I do not, and I'll stand right here and say it to the end of the earth. You are not going to receive a 1-to-1 redemption exchange on these Zim bonds. Cannot be. That's too much and impossible. But I do believe that it's possible that different notes could receive. Basically, they'll use the same formula, but I believe the formula might be modified slightly based on how you intend to use it. So if you, it's been said that there's 3 different avenues that you could go down. You could simply redeem the bond and receive the money and walk away and never do anything else with it. And the second is that you might redeem your bond, be offered a sum of money, and it's possible that some of that money might be receivable at the meeting, or let's just say credit would be applied to an account, and that some of that money would be considered for humanitarian projects. That was the focus of this to begin with, that it be used for humanity. And so you would be faced with a decision. Should I decide for myself what that project would be, or do I support groups or humanitarian groups that are at large? And I've been told that there would be a list of approved groups that you could apply your humanitarian funds to without any oversight by you. And I believe that's probably the way most people would go if they decide to have any input as to the humanitarian project. Let me back up and say that the first choice, if you decide to simply take the money and run, would still contain a humanitarian portion. And that portion would be, if you walk away with no direction for them, they will simply apply it to what they believe the needs are. Maybe there's some groups out there that don't have as much as many funds as do others, so that they would decide what happens with that. If you just willingly say nothing, they're going to go back to the lowest common denominator and say, okay, here's an extra $1 million. We need to apply it somewhere. Where do we want to do it? The third option is that people would perhaps have direct oversight and control of those monies. And in doing so, they would be subject to oversight from essentially a committee of people that would come in and verify that you're doing the work that you say you're going to do. It doesn't necessarily matter what it is. If it's approved, then they will expect results. And so if you're going to provide housing for the homeless, they expect you to produce housing and begin to have a program that will support the homeless. But if you have other projects, you could, things that don't exist today, you can come up with a plan, a basic structured outline, and say, well, this is my hope and dream. And because I haven't had any money to do anything with, it's never gone beyond the dream stage. I only dream of doing this. And for some people, let's just say my daughter would dream of rehabilitating vast amounts of farmland back into a natural state that it was before mankind took it over and planted this nitrate, a grass, let's say, a grass that depends on fertilizer every day. Well, there are grasses that do not demand that. There are pasture things that do not demand that. They produce their own. So she has a desire to rehabilitate great numbers of land, acres of land. And so that's wonderful. That's great. I support her. And I hope that they'll approve us for that effort. But that's just another deal.
Yes, and that would be a great use for the bonds. We sure appreciate your time today, Lowtide.
Well, thank you. I don't know that I was helpful at all. This is all public knowledge. Nothing I've said is it can all be verified if you do your homework, and that's what I hope everybody will do. They will do their own homework so that they can sit there, at least have a conversation with people at the redemption. This is not necessarily about having a conversation at the coffee shop. And I do not recommend that anybody go public with their conversations, because again, you will be prosecuted or persecuted based on anything you say or do. And so these efforts, if we are blessed enough to receive them, were not done so that you could receive glory. They were done that you might receive action from you and the Father above, and that you might be glorified. He might be glorified in all the things that you do. And so be at heart, be at peace, and have great joy. We know that our redemption is for these things is very close, even if it's not the return of our Savior. I believe our Savior expects us and would really like to see us as a whole take back the creation and do good things as it was intended, not to bow a knee and just to get by with society and get along and obey the laws. Do good works, pray always, and don't be afraid to reach out and help your neighbor. And with that, I'll say good day.
Thank you so much, Lowtide. We sure appreciate your time. The problem that most people have nowadays is they're stuck in the work, eat, sleep cycle, and they're raising their families and they have their kids to tend. A lot of people are raising their grandchildren and they don't have the extra time to do the research. So that's why Seeds of Wisdom is here, providing knowledgeable information with factual information to back it up, all of the articles that we share and things, so that people don't have to necessarily go out and do as much legwork, but we definitely do encourage them to still go out and do the research that they need to be sure of what they hold and diversify where they can. Like you pointed out, the small ways, the small things that they can do, like the coins, in order to have a little bit of nest egg so that when everything is exchanged, they have something. So again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody that has joined us today, and we wish you all a very blessed day. Thank you.